I heard a disturbing story this week. I heard a story about a man who was driving in his own neighborhood, and he began having a seizure in his car, and he drove his car, I think, into it. Well, he didn't exactly drive it into a neighbor's lawn, but someone that was in this neighborhood doing yard work for people, hired to take care of their lawns, saw this happening, and helped kind of navigate the car to a stop and getting it, and it ended up in someone's yard. And trying to get this person help and kind of screaming for help. The nutshell of the story is the people in the house were like, "Get off of my yard. Like, you can die somewhere else, but not in my yard." And the person just persisted, the person trying to help persisted and remembered seeing this person at one of the houses, and so thought, "I know where this person lives," and just frantic to try to get help, ran to the house, was able to find the wife, call 911, and the emergency responders ended up posting the story in appreciation of this person. But it brings new meaning to NIMBY. Not in my backyard. A term that we often know as environmentalists, or people that are aware of our own responsibility to kind of co-create in accordance with the highest. It's like, when I say not in my backyard, what am I actually saying, and what is my responsibility? Can I take care of my junk? Can I take care of my stuff? Can I do what is mine to do? Am I living a life of integrity? NIMBY, not in my backyard. Well, there's another kind of thing that happens when we look at problems or issues and we don't want them to be our problems, or we want to think we would do something different. And I think of it as noop. Noop. Not out of my pocket. Noop. You want to solve that problem? Well, noop. Not out of my pocket. And that, it applies to hunger, it applies to suffering, it applies to us co-creating conditions in the world that don't work for all. In Unity, one of our greatest mission statements of this movement is to co-create a world that works for all, and that is for all of us to do. And it's a funny little example, but I like kind of talking about how we plop onto this planet. We plop onto this planet as naked little babies, and the sun is shining, and the earth is growing food, and there is more than enough for everyone. There is abundance. And we also plop onto this planet without a guidebook and no rules, right? So there's no way we have to do stuff, right? But we are interesting. And we are complicated little creatures. And so we create systems, and we have dynamics, and we have egos that we push and pull, and we have haves, and we have have-nots, and we have self, and we have other. And from these beautiful, perfect little naked babies floating onto the planet, a planet of abundance, a planet of clean water, a planet of more than enough, we create hell in heaven. Right? It's something that we do. And when I talk to my Buddhist friend about it, he says, engage the practice, because my unity mind, unity kind of stands in the practice, but then it goes, let's get better. Let's reach higher, right? And he reminds me, this is the human condition. This is what humanity has been doing since humanity has been on the planet. And Buddhism is a lot about letting go of attachment and not wanting things to be different from what they are, but it's also interesting because there's a fine line where you enter the place where you need sometimes to have that non-attachment to actually make the space for what is pure. So it's not necessarily that Eastern and New Thought don't match. In fact, there is a space and a place where I think they actually merge and support each other, but you have to have kind of an expanded awareness of both of them to find that place. But both are certainly helpful. Wealth and poverty are complicated, but they are also simple. If everyone had the same consciousness around necessities, spending, and savings, maybe it would be simpler, but we don't at all. Anyone ever lent money to someone else? Did you ever lend money to someone else? And then you were privy to the way they were spending all of their money? And it was like, wow, I wouldn't borrow money and then do that. Like if I borrow money from you because I need it that much, I'm probably not going to be going out to dinner, doing these things, doing the things that I think of as luxuries, not necessities, right? I remember a story about someone borrowing money from a relative, and the relative lent them money because they really were in a bind and they needed money, and they either put in an in-ground pool or they got one fixed. Now, the person that lent the money doesn't have an in-ground pool, so you can see how when our values aren't lined up, it's interesting, isn't it? It's just very interesting, and people are interesting. People are complicated, and they're also simple. So if we all had the same ideas around necessities, around what's valuable, around what's important, things would be a lot simpler. Maybe even easier, but we don't. So let's talk about Jeff Bezos. Did you want to come to UVC today to talk about Jeff Bezos? Oh, there are so many opinions flying out there. There are so many ideas of what's going on with Jeff Bezos, who just took his rocket ship, we'll call it a rocket ship, who just took his rocket ship and went up into space just past the atmosphere, which I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson said 2 dimes worth if you looked at this perspective scale, like just past the atmosphere. So shot up there for 11 minutes and was past the kind of atmosphere that we usually go for 1 minute, right? 1 minute past that point. And so took that flight, and feelings are high about that. Feelings are high. Sometimes they're low. There are criticisms. There is some disgust going around. There are some feelings of misplaced values, feelings of, how are we spending money on that when we have this going on? What business do we have doing that when this is going on? And then there are also ideas of support, awe, appreciation, that this is historical, this is monumental, to have someone that is not affiliated with, government and programs and all of the other things to go past the edge of space, that is actually some progress that is pretty amazing. So there's been a lot of thinking and a lot of thought going on about this. And thinking that is economic, thinking that is psychological, thinking that is sociological, thinking that is in so many different ways, different perspectives to have on this whole situation, but not necessarily spiritual. So let's talk spiritual today. Let's set the rest aside and let's talk spiritual conversation around this. You might want to take a deep breath because we get really attached to our ideas and our opinions. And so are we willing to have a beginner's mind and set all those thoughts, all those judgments, all of our decisions that we've already made aside for just a moment and go on an adventure of thought? So one of the things that I thought was interesting was this petition against him coming back, which was, kind of... let's just say a cheeky little rascal put that out. But about 200,000 people signed a petition saying don't come back to Earth, that billionaires don't belong on Earth and they don't belong in space either. And then I saw something else, which I tried to find it, and, bless my little brain, I didn't know how much was out there. So I got to see a lot of interesting things on the way to try to find what I saw once and just passed by it. But I saw this one post that said, it was just an image and a poster, and it said something about a call to, don't we want to solve the issues on the planet Earth, or don't we want to heal and feed the world, end hunger, before we go out and conquer space and bring like this garbage into space? And I remember kind of being struck by it and thinking, like, we're not fixing what's here, and we're expanding. And one of our principles is, like, if you want more, right, if you want a bigger house, then take care of the house you have. If you want more love, how are you showing up to the love that you have, right? So that is one of our New Thought and Unity principles. But it kind of gets deeper here. So I have noticed that when we talk about our criticisms, we talk about, Jeff Bezos going and spending this much money to do this, and people are saying, why don't you spend your money on fixing these things that are going on? And there's a point there, right? There's a point there. But did he single-handedly create the issues that we have going on? And do we really think that with whatever amount of money he could pour into these issues, do we think that could fix it? Really fix it? Maybe, but maybe not. And in our Unity teachings, we know that problems have to be solved on the level of consciousness. Problems have to have solutions. Solutions that come from the soul. Solutions that come from our deepest integrity. That we can't solve things at the level of which the problem was created. And the level of which these problems that we're experiencing in the collective were created is the level of separation and the level of othering. It's the level of creating a scapegoat and the human condition loving and wanting a scapegoat to say, it's up to you. How dare you? Rather than saying it's up to us. That this is something systematic that we've all created. There is that old story that goes around through Unity. I bet probably every minister has shared it, and it was probably Eric Butterworth that first shared it. But he said, if you give someone $1 million and they don't have the consciousness to hold on to that $1 million, you're going to come back in a year or 2 years or whatever, and they're not going to have it. Have you experienced that with yourself, with whatever it is? If I wasn't worthy enough, if I didn't feel worthy enough for the love, if the love came to me, I may have lost it because I didn't see what was in front of me. If I don't create the consciousness, I could create the consciousness often to bring something in, right? To match something, to see the opportunity, because God is a grand overall yes. So I can bring it in. I can bring it in all the time because opportunities are always there. Our yes, it's always given. But can I hold on to it? That's dependent upon my consciousness. My consciousness of how I show up to something, my consciousness of how I value it, my consciousness of self-worth, my consciousness of God consciousness. Sometimes when we look at in a spiritual community and in greater community or families, when we look at doing charitable work or giving, there is sometimes conflict. And I've seen something happen. I've seen something happen when you try to do something good and people cut people down. They cut people down because the one that's either leading the good and saying, okay, let's step into doing some good and let's do it in this way. This is the way I'm inspired. This is the way I'm directed. Let's go in this direction. And other people say, not that direction. And they say, we can't do that unless we've done all of this first. And what does that do? It tends to kind of, when the left arm is trying to serve and feed, it tends to just cut off the right arm and say that if we, I'll give the easiest example is animal support, animal rescue, animal support, anything like that. If you bring that up in many circles, like let's have a fundraiser for animals in need or abuse or whatever, what happens? What do some other people say? How are we doing that if we're not taking care of our children? How could we do that if we're not feeding our children? Right? But see, they're not mutually exclusive. That's the funky thing about the mind and the human condition and self and other. We go into these things because we want a way to figure everything out, and we like scapegoats. We like thinking if it was my way, it would all be better. But here's the key. Here's one of the spiritual keys is the person that's passionate about animal rescue needs to follow that passion and rescue animals. The person that's passionate about world hunger needs to go and start serving and contribute to world hunger. And yes, we all need to do all of it in consciousness, but we're all not passionate or directed to all of it all of the time. So what we can do is give to where we see God being shared. We can give to where we see God being shared. So anytime we see someone doing good, rather than saying, stop doing that good because you should be doing this other good that I care about. Would you stop it? Stop doing that good and do the good I care about. When we want to say that, you know what? We're probably feeling, I'm not doing enough for the good that I care about. That is probably what we're feeling. And that's just a call to more mindfulness, to more action, to more connections, to creating a bigger network, to getting together with more people who are passionate about what you're passionate about. But there is no shortage in this universe. It is an illusion. We're naked little babies popped onto an incredible experience, an incredible planet with more than enough. And so all of those other things are illusions. They're sidetracks. They're scapegoats. They're all these other little things that beg us to listen or beg us to pick apart someone else. They're just adventures of the ego. It might be different if you could convince everyone to do what you want all the time. You know what I mean? Then that might be the case. But here's the reality of the human condition. The human condition is one that if you're passionate about something, you're going to do something about it. If you care about something, you're going to give to it. If something's important to you, you're going to stand for it. And if I take that away from you, you're not going to just start doing what I think you should do or what I want you to do. You're probably going to do nothing. And here's the spiritual condition. The spiritual condition is that we follow what we're passionate about, that each one of us is connected in a sphere of God, in an energy field of God consciousness, and we are connected to what we are inspired about because we are guided. And it's important. And it's important to listen. And the worst thing is you shut that off, you turn that down, you criticize someone enough so they're not following and listening to that anymore. Atrophy, atrophy, atrophy. They won't start doing what you want them to do. They'll just be a depressed couch potato if they can afford the chips. Eating chips, watching TV. They're not going to go save your dogs. No, no, no. They're not. They're not going to go feed the children. They're going to eat the children's food. It's true, I think, to the best of my consciousness at this moment. Eric Butterworth, celebrate yourself. The universe is abundant and unlimited in every respect. If it were limited, it would have long since depleted itself. You might be saying it has depleted itself. Is that true? Or have we been working to deplete it? It is an incredible giver. It is an incredible healer. It is insanely generous. The sun shines on everyone. It is no respecter of persons. He says there is always enough of everything to go around, and I would say everything important, everything really necessary, everything really needed. He said there is no premium to living. There is enough life for all persons and for all time. He goes on to say, love cannot be depleted. Love is. There's always enough love to go around. The continued use of a principle never exhausts the principle. The continued use of a principle never exhausts the principle. Thus, as the expression of the universal God principle, you can never exhaust the potential of life or wisdom or love or substance. He says the issue is we lose sight of our uniqueness as integral parts of the universe. We begin to separate ourselves. We begin to not know our inheritance and our power. So it's a good thing that not all of our passions are the same. The not so great thing is that we're all not standing for them, that we're not unified also in supporting them when we see them. When we can recognize a God-given passion, we're not all standing from them. And the other issue is that we like to engage in comparison. All of the things we're passionate about are important, and we are uniquely drawn to and awakened by the ones that are in our hearts and in our minds. Let's do some perspective hopping. So with this back to Bezos conversation, are you ready? We're hopping back to Bezos. Maybe that's the talk title, Back to Bezos. That's not going to get much traction out there. He might listen to it. I don't know. That would be funny. I wonder what he would think. Who knows? Yeah, doesn't matter. So we tend to think it's his problem because he got a lot of money, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who don't think there should be billionaires out there, and the billionaires' money should be going to other things. I'm not going to reveal what camp I'm in, but you can probably guess. But the issue is not the billionaires. The issue is not the billionaires. They did what they did in a system that created them, that they were able to be created. And some of them are doing amazing things with their money. And others are, that man just recently lifted into his Freedom Forum, and he was like some massive funder of hate groups and divisiveness. So there's a lot of things we can do. Our money is just the energy that we put out there and that we circulate. But let's do the perspective hopping to really say, did he create the problem? And yes, you could say that he contributes to it or he benefits from a system, but we created it. And very infrequently do people jump out of a system that benefits their own selves, out of a system that benefits themselves, to have more taken away. Now, great ones do that. Great ones look at integrity and just say, even though this is what's going on with me, I think an integrous system would be this. And they offer out that system even when it does not personally benefit them, because they know the ideals of benefiting the collective and benefiting the greater good. And they know it's impossible, actually, for them not to benefit if the greater good benefits. They know that that is a truth principle, right? Buddha did that when Buddha was like, get me out of this palace, Dad. Forget it. Like, I don't need all this stuff. Look, I just saw someone suffering on the road. How are you keeping me in here with all this luxury, with all this good, when there's suffering out there? I'm going to go out there. I'm going to sit and I'm going to figure out what enlightenment is. I'm going to figure out how to solve it. And what was the solution? The solution was about mindfulness and about releasing suffering from an internal practice. Recognizing that the world will do what the world will do, but the deepest emancipation is not that, you didn't hear the story about Buddha selling the whole house, even though he did give up the house, but he didn't convince his dad to sell the whole, palace or whatever to feed everybody and solve the problem once and for all. If he did, then we would have had, that would have been the day that, hunger and poverty stopped. But instead, the Buddha gave us a spiritual practice about attachment, about awakening, and about enlightenment. Jesus, the master teacher, had not a possession, yet gave an incredible amount, stepped out of the system that benefited him into the benefit of the greater good, into the benefit of all humanity. St. Francis, you can go on, finding the lessons and the stories of those who overcame the desire to feed and replace that with the desire to give to all of humanity, to raise the field, to raise people up. But here's the thing that happens. So one might think, how could Bezos spend all that money going on a ship and a rocket in space and this when we have this going on? And then you may know that perspective hopping, you could hop to the perspective of like, how could someone spend money on 3 and 4 and 5 houses when there are people starving? And then you could go, how could someone spend $5,000 on a purse when there are people that don't have clothes? And then you could say, how could someone have a boat? We're in Missouri right here. You guys are, the virtual people are all over. But you fill in the blank. What is it that you love to have where you are? A bicycle, a boat? What just brings some extra joy to your life? A garden? Well, you can't put gardens in there. Gardens are totally of God. Everyone needs to have one. But how could you have a boat when people are starving? And then you can go to, how can you have a house that's bigger than what you need when people are starving? How can you each have your own homes when people are starving? How can you ever throw away food? How can you have a refrigerator that has more than what's enough for you and your family when people are starving? How can you complain about having rice to eat when you have a roof over your head? It's all perspective. And you can, to get out of our own mindsets, right, we can keep whittling it down and saying, what would someone else say about me? If I am saying this about them, what would someone else say about me? Because there's almost always a someone else. And probably when there's not, you're not even saying it. There's an amazing grace. So can we be humble enough and have perspective enough to see that it's complicated? You could take a couple other examples. How could someone ever get a purebred when there are animals in the shelter? How could someone ever have a biological child when there are foster children and children that needs homes, right? So you can go on and on and on. So what if it's beyond all of that? What if it's beyond all of that thinking? And what if there is a spiritual lesson that will lift us out of all of it? See, the human condition is one where we tend to make someone other people, not me, not like me, not okay if it's not like me, not acceptable if they're not making choices I would make. And then in the human condition, we tend to do if-then a lot. If they did this, then this would happen. If I had that, then I would. And we tend to unknowingly find scapegoats rather than step into our own co-creative ability and our own power. But the spiritual condition teaches us to think outside of the box. It teaches us to think outside of our self-interests and outside of ourself. It teaches us to go beyond other and into unity. And it teaches us to step out of the current paradigm and look at things differently. It also teaches us to apply principle. At every stage, to apply principle. Apply it to ourselves, apply it to the collective, apply it to our systems, apply it to our creations. And spiritual condition and spiritual principle expects us to expand awareness. When it's applied, our awareness expands. So, are we able and willing to expand into our spiritual condition and apply a different realm of thinking? A realm of thinking that gets out of ourselves and into principle. Do we believe that people should follow their heart's desires? Do we believe that people are given inspirations, inspired, that desires are of the Father, of the source, and that we should support ourselves and each other living them? I do. Far be it from me to know what's going to come from someone shooting a rocket into space. What good might come from that? Someone that has a ton of wealth could also look at someone else and say, well, at least I'm doing other things that are good. At least I'm having an impact. At least I'm creating jobs. At least I'm doing this. That person's just eating, sleeping, using the restroom, and that's their life. We can't judge. Well, we can, and we do all the time. But it doesn't help us. It doesn't support us to judge each other's lives. So yes, do I have fears? I have fears we're going to bring pollution into the next whatever frontiers that we're going to exploit. Sure, those things come into mind, but also comes to mind that there could be innovations and possibilities and that there could be progress. So can I be in a space where I just let all those things be and recognize that it's my work, it's my own work to discern my own passion, my own desires for the greater good, my own values, and to separate those from my own waste, my own gluttony, my own ego, to use it as my own wake-up call. Where am I not in integrity with how I'm living my life? Where do I think I can be a part of the great awakening that would implement systematic change? So we're not just putting Band-Aids on the problems and the suffering anymore, but we're not creating the suffering to be solved anymore. If we keep pouring everything into all of the problems that we have, we're focusing on the problems. That's not to say it's not important to show up compassionately, resourcefully, and abundantly in caring for self-other planet creation. But it's saying that it's an illusion that if we think we can just keep pouring in and asking everyone to keep pouring in without generating consciousness, without generating soul-utions that no longer enable or create the issue. So the principles tell us that there's abundance, that we have everything that we need before we ask. The principles tell us that God, as substance, life intelligence substance, is inexhaustible. Principles tell us that our passion is our guidance system from the divine. It is our inspiration, it is our intelligence, and that the key is to source the passions. You know, when, back to Bezos, when he got down, he later did an announcement about $100 million going to an innovative form of charity, right? He picked those two individuals. He picked two people that he saw there doing good work, Van Jones and Jose Andres, and he said, here is some money, just a little bit. Here's just a little bit of $100 million, and no strings attached, no bureaucracy. You do whatever you want to do with this. You can keep it for your own organization. You can merge with others. You can give it away. You can do whatever. But you can fund what you're doing with what you have. Now, that is kind of innovative, right? Has anyone written a grant? Like you write a grant and you got to log. Wait, okay, I spent it like this, and I did exactly this, and I did exactly this, and here's your evidence, here are all the receipts, and here's the audit, here you go, exactly like this. And sometimes that can limit a vision, can it not? Because along the way, you could be like, actually, this is what I am inspired to now. Actually, this is what it needs to be. Actually, it would have been even better had I known. I would have written the grant that said this, or the money to do this, whatever. When we direct it and we say, here it is, and you use it exactly in this way, we're saying, according to my consciousness, or according to the space where my consciousness merges with your consciousness. But if we leave everyone to their own consciousness, what might they create? What might they create? So he did that with no strings attached, saying, here it is. I think you're good people. Create. Go for your passion. Let this empower your passion. It'll be interesting to see what happens. The Courage and Civility Award, recognizing leaders who aim high and pursue solutions with courage. Bezos also, on July 14th, made a commitment for $200 million to the DC Smithsonian Museum. Now that could be, when I went to Egypt, I did think to myself, we got like King Tut, and we've got all this and all of these museums, and then we've got all this smog and pollution killing the people that are alive here right now. And you've got people hungry and homeless, and why are you doing the museum? But again, just moving beyond that paradigm, that's the human brain. Get to the spiritual. Get to the spiritual. Last year, a $10 billion pledge to combat climate change through the Bezos Earth Fund, plus other initiatives. When I look at all that, I've got to get out of my little perspective, that little brain that thinks I know this or that thinks I know how. And it's like, well, right now, it is what is. There is someone that is activating passions. And then look at his wife. His wife is just like giving it away, right? Just like, where can I see people doing good work and help them? Again, we never want to be in a space where we lack compassion, or we stand in the midst of suffering and say, not in my backyard, or not my problem, or not out of my pocket. But also, as individuals that know about deep spiritual principle and deep spiritual practice, it is incumbent upon us in these days to stand in our principles, knowing that we must put more energy into the solutions, into generating. If we are so fixated on fixing, just fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it. It's like a house you can never get clean because nothing has a place. You got to spend some time, more time than you do cleaning, making spaces and creating order so you're not constantly spending all of your time cleaning the messy house that you keep messing up. There's a quote that I have shared so many times from Howard Thurman: don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive and go and do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. I've shared that a lot. I shared that right in this sanctuary on that screen with my ministerial graduation picture in 2015. I think it was 2015. No, it's been a long. Oh my gosh, I'm old. It was 2003 to 2005. Brandon's like, really? 2005. I stood in this sanctuary in 2005 with that quote. And I have shared it in many a talk, in many a sanctuary across the United States. But one thing I have never done is unpacked it. I've always launched it out there and just left it to radiate. Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Doesn't that seem a little selfish? To look at all the needs of the world and say, don't ask yourself what the world needs. But it doesn't stop there. It says, ask yourself what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. That's principle. It's not saying don't care about what the world needs. It's not saying you won't be addressing what the world needs. It won't say anything about that, right? It's not saying that all of these things don't matter. It's saying the path to getting there is not looking at it and trying to rearrange it. The path to getting there is standing in your passion and coming alive. Namaste.